Those words weren't just a sentence. They were the beginning of a truth so unexpected and profound that for a moment I couldn't breathe. I read them in a letter tucked away in one of my husband's drawers, written in his meticulous handwriting. And suddenly everything I thought I knew about him, about us, shifted like sand underfoot. All those Tuesdays, the quiet, unfussy routine that had become so familiar, suddenly felt like a mystery echoing out of the past, asking questions I had never imagined I'd need to answer. For years, I watched him leave the house every Tuesday morning, tie his tie a little too neatly, grab his car keys, and drive off with that subtle mix of determination and calm that was so uniquely him. I never thought to ask why. It just was. A habit. A weekly ritual, like watering plants or doing laundry. Something as ordinary as coffee on a rainy day. But when the truth finally came to light, that ordinary rhythm became extraordinary. Not because of where he went, but because of why he went. And when I read the reason, I froze. My husband, Martin, was a simple man with simple pleasures and deep quiet strength. He worked as an engineer for most of his life, loved crossword puzzles, never forgot our anniversary, and had a gentle way about him that made people feel safe. He didn't speak often about his past. He didn't boast. He didn't keep secrets, or so I believed. Tuesday mornings were reserved for a ritual that I assumed was simple and predictable. A bank visit, a few errands, a stop at the local diner for black coffee, then home by noon. Sometimes I'd ask him about his day when he got back. He just likes the routine, our friends would say. It gives him structure, they'd add. I nodded and smiled, because who questions a husband going to the bank every Tuesday? Not once did it occur to me that the bank was not the point. It was a Tuesday, of all days. The irony wasn't lost on me later. He didn't make it home. A heart attack, swift, silent, decisive. At the hospital, the doctors said they did everything they could. I remember gripping the edges of the chair so tightly that my knuckles turned white, repeating his name like a prayer I hoped would bring him back. When they finally let me into the room, his face was peaceful, almost as if he had simply decided to rest. But there were things left unsaid, questions left unasked, and routines left without explanation. A week after the funeral, as I was sorting through his belongings, I found an envelope marked, "Open only after I'm gone." His handwriting was familiar, neat, intentional, a little bit hesitant. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded with precision, and I recognized his voice immediately as I read. "My dearest, if you are reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. There is something you should know about Tuesday mornings. I never told you because I wanted to protect you from worry, and because I feared the truth might change how you see me. But now you deserve to understand why I did what I did, every week, for 38 years. I stopped reading. My breath caught. Who was he talking about? Why had he been hiding a truth like this for so long? And what was I about to discover? At the bottom of the envelope was a photo, faded, slightly creased at the edges. It showed a young Martin, standing outside the same bank branch he visited every Tuesday for decades. He wasn't alone. He was holding the hand of a young woman I didn't recognize, someone who wasn't me. My chest tightened. This was the beginning of a journey I didn't plan to take, a journey into a past I didn't know existed. For 38 years he went there every Tuesday without fail, rain or shine, sick or well, holiday or ordinary day. There was never an exception. People stick to routine, sure, but not for nearly 4 decades, not without reason. Something in me knew this was more than habit. It was purpose. I returned to the letter. I read on. "You always asked why I went there so often. I never told you because I didn't want secrets between us. I wanted protection. There was a time when I feared what I felt, and even more, how it would change both of our lives." I paused again. He feared something. What could be so important that he dedicated 38 years of his life to it? The next day, I drove to the small bank branch, the same one he visited every Tuesday morning. It was modest, not a towering headquarters or a corporate building, just a simple, friendly place with a few tellers and a couple of offices. Inside, the receptionist recognized me instantly. "Mrs. Carter?" she asked gently. "We've been expecting you." Expecting me? My heart sank and rose at the same time. This was the moment I was learning there were parts of his life I had never truly known. After a few minutes, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes approached. "I'm Anne," she said softly. "I worked with your husband for many years. If you'd like, we have something you should see." She led me into a small office and offered me a seat. Her hands trembled ever so slightly as she handed me a folder labeled Carter. Inside was a timeline, handwritten notes, dates, deposits, letters, records I couldn't yet place. It began in the late 1970s, just after he married me, and continued uninterrupted until the year he died. But it wasn't financial records. It was something else entirely. The pages were filled with names, not mine, not family, not friends. A name I had never heard before, repeated with meticulous detail. And then the reason became clear. Every Tuesday for 38 years, my husband wasn't simply going to the bank to pay bills. He was keeping a promise, one he had made long before I ever knew him. But once I read the first name linked to the entries, I froze. For more inspiring and heart-touching stories like this, please subscribe to our channel. I didn't plan to return to the facility so soon, but my body took me there anyway. Eleanor was in the same spot by the window. She looked up as if she had been waiting. "You came back," she said. "Yes," I replied. "I did." She didn't ask who I was. She didn't ask why I was there. She didn't ask where Martin was. She simply handed me the napkin she had been folding. "Can you help me with this?" she asked. So I did. Eleanor lived in fragments, moments stitched loosely together. But in those moments, she was present fully. She didn't carry regret. She didn't carry expectation. She carried now. And somehow, that made the decision harder. "Do you miss him?" I asked gently. She considered this. "Yes," she said. "But he told me he wouldn't disappear. He said someone kind would come." My throat tightened. He had prepared her, too. Something shifted then. Not forgiveness. Understanding. Martin didn't think I would resent Eleanor. He thought I would be stronger than he was. That realization softened my anger. What scared me wasn't Eleanor. It was time. Commitment. The realization that my grief would not be quiet. It would be shared. And that meant delaying my own healing. As I prepared to leave, Eleanor touched my sleeve. "Will you come back next Tuesday?" she asked. Next Tuesday. The word settled into me. Not forever. Not always. Just next Tuesday. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. She nodded. "That's okay," she replied. "Tuesdays wait." I drove slowly. I passed the bank, the diner, the route Martin took every week. And I realized something quietly devastating. He never asked himself if it was fair. He asked himself if it was right. I loved Martin. But love doesn't obligate inheritance of unfinished work. Choice does. And choice had finally been placed in my hands. That night, I stood in our bedroom, holding one of his old shirts. "If this were reversed," I whispered, "would I do it?" The answer came uninvited. Yes. I wasn't afraid of caring for Eleanor. I was afraid of becoming like Martin, quietly carrying something alone for decades. But maybe that wasn't the lesson. Maybe the lesson was to carry it differently. I called, and the next morning, "I'll do it," I said. But not the way he did. There was relief in her silence. I wouldn't disappear into it. I wouldn't hide it. And I wouldn't pretend it was easy. But I would show up. Tuesday wasn't an obligation. It was a choice. One I would make again, or not, each week. And that made all the difference. The truth no longer froze me. It challenged me. And the life Martin built in secret was now stepping into the light. With consequences. With questions. With grace. The first Tuesday came faster than I expected. I woke up before the alarm, my body already tense, my mind rehearsing reasons to delay. Not excuses, reasons. There's a difference. Excuses are dishonest. Reasons feel responsible. And responsibility was the weight I was learning to carry without letting it crush me. Martin used to leave quietly on Tuesdays. I didn't. I stood in the doorway for a long moment before locking it, aware of how symbolic that small act felt. I wasn't stepping into his life. I was stepping into a choice I had made deliberately, with my eyes open. I didn't take the exact route Martin always used. Not because I was avoiding it, but because I needed to remind myself that this wasn't repetition. It was continuation, yes. But it was also transformation. The bank wasn't my first stop. The facility was. Eleanor was in the common room again, sunlight warming the side of her face. She looked up when she saw me, and something brightened in her eyes. Not recognition exactly, but reassurance. "You came," she said. "Yes," I replied. "I did." She nodded, satisfied. No questions. No expectations beyond presence. Eleanor didn't need explanations. She needed consistency. Martin had taught her that. I was learning it. The staff noticed immediately. Not suspiciously, curiously. They had seen people promise things before. Grand declarations. Emotional commitments that faded quietly after a few weeks. I wasn't dramatic. I was steady. That seemed to matter more. After spending an hour with Eleanor, I met with the facility director. "I'll be involved," I said clearly. "But I won't be invisible." She nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. "I'll need transparency," I continued. "Updates, input, and room to ask questions." That was new. Martin had never asked. I loved him, but loving him didn't mean repeating him. Martin had shouldered everything silently. I refused to confuse silence with strength. Later that morning, I went to the bank. The same office, the same chair, and smiled gently when she saw me. "You're early," she said. "I won't always be," I replied. "But I'll be consistent." She smiled wider. We reviewed the trust. I asked questions Martin never had. About long-term contingencies. About oversight. About shared responsibility. "This doesn't need to be solitary," I said. And nodded. He believed it did. "I don't," I replied. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. I didn't feel guilty. Not for being alive. Not for moving forward. Not for reshaping something Martin had created. I felt aligned. And alignment feels like relief. Grief didn't vanish. But it loosened its grip. It made room. Room for purpose that didn't erase loss, but honored it differently. By the second Tuesday, the fear had softened. I brought Eleanor a scarf she admired during my first visit. She wrapped it around her neck carefully, as if it were something precious. "He had good taste," she said. "He did," I replied. Some days she remembered Martin clearly. Some days she didn't. But she always remembered how he made her feel. Safe. That was his legacy. A social worker joined me during one visit. "I just want you to know," she said. "You don't have to do this alone." The words landed gently. I accepted them. That was another difference. Between Tuesdays, my life continued. Friends checked in. Meals were cooked. Evenings passed. I didn't put myself on hold. That mattered. When people asked about the bank, I told them the truth. Not all of it, but enough. "My husband left behind a responsibility," I said, "and I chose how to carry it." They didn't always understand. That was okay. I stopped asking, "Is this fair?" Fairness isn't always the measure. Meaning is. One Tuesday afternoon, as I was leaving the facility, Eleanor waved at me from her chair. Not anxiously. Not desperately. Confidently. As if she knew I would return. That trust didn't trap me. It grounded me. Martin never knew I was capable of this. Not because he doubted me. Because he never gave himself permission to share the load. That was his flaw. And his gift. I wasn't replacing him. I wasn't becoming him. I was doing something braver. I was choosing presence without martyrdom. Every Tuesday, I asked myself the same thing. Can I show up today without disappearing from myself? So far, the answer had been yes. There were challenges coming. Legal ones. Emotional ones. Questions I hadn't considered yet. But I was no longer frozen by truth. I was moving through it. They weren't symbols of secrecy anymore. They were reminders of choice. Of love that adapts. Of promises that evolve. Martin's story had ended. Mine hadn't. And the reason behind 38 years of Tuesdays was becoming something entirely new. By the fifth Tuesday, I realized something quietly unsettling. Truth doesn't just reveal. It rearranges. And rearranging a life, even one built on good intentions, creates friction. It arrived on a Thursday. Plain envelope. Typed address. No return name. Inside was a letter from a distant cousin of Martin's, someone I hadn't seen in over a decade. She had questions. About Eleanor. About the trust. About why I was involved. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it on the table. This was the part Martin had protected me from. Martin's silence hadn't existed in isolation. It had shaped expectations. And now that the truth was visible, people who had once looked away were suddenly looking in. Not aggressive. Not kind. Just curious enough to feel intrusive. I heard you're managing something Martin left behind, one voice said. Yes, I replied calmly. Well, people are wondering. I stopped her gently. People always wonder, I said. That doesn't mean they're owed answers. Because Martin had answered everyone. Even when it cost him peace. Even when it drained him. Saying no felt like betrayal. But it wasn't. It was correction. Eleanor was quieter that day. She didn't smile right away. Instead, she studied my face. You look tired, she said. I am, I admitted. She nodded as if that made sense. You don't have to be strong here, she added. And just like that, my eyes burned. Permission. Martin had never asked for it. I finally accepted it. Relief isn't about ease. It's about alignment. And for the first time, I felt aligned with both truth and self-preservation. A week later, someone finally asked it outright. Why didn't Martin tell anyone? I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, because he believed kindness should be quiet. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Martin believed love required endurance. I believed love required honesty. Both mattered. Only one was sustainable. Not everyone stayed polite. Some questioned legality. Some questioned intent. Some questioned me. I listened. Then I documented. Then I proceeded. The trust was solid, transparent, legal, intentional. Martin hadn't been reckless. He had been careful. That gave me confidence. I brought Eleanor fresh flowers. She touched the petals gently. He always remembered Tuesdays, she said. Yes, I replied. He did. She looked at me closely. And now you do too. I nodded. But this time, I didn't feel weighed down by it. I stopped seeing Tuesdays as obligation. They became choice. Chosen actions feel lighter, even when they're heavy. One afternoon, a relative asked, how long are you going doing this? I answered honestly, as long as it aligns with who I am. They didn't like that answer. I did. It no longer pressed on my chest. It settled behind me, like a shadow I acknowledged but didn't follow. She asked, are people upset? Some, I admitted. She nodded thoughtfully. They were upset when he started coming too, she said. That stopped me. Not the paperwork. Not the secrecy. The choice. Martin had chosen her. Every Tuesday. And choice apparently makes people uncomfortable. It happened quietly. In my kitchen. While washing a cup he used to drink from. I forgave him for not trusting me with the truth sooner. Because now I understood. He was afraid of burdening me. Love that hides isn't weaker. But love that shares is braver. Eleanor laughed that day. Really laughed. At something small. Something human. And in that moment, I knew Martin's legacy wasn't the trust. It was continuity. Not just maintaining funds. But maintaining dignity. For Eleanor. For Martin. For myself. I no longer justified my actions. I simply lived them. Explanations invite debate. Integrity stands alone. I could feel it. Something was approaching. Not conflict. Closure. But closure isn't an ending. It's a turning point. Questions. Change. Even loss. But not fear. Fear had already had its time. Martin went to the bank every Tuesday for 38 years because he believed showing up mattered. I kept going because I learned that how you show up matters even more. And soon, I would have to decide what showing up would look like next. The invitation came in the form of an email. Not urgent. Not hostile. But heavy with implication. a request for a formal review of the trust. Reviews weren't unusual, but this one wasn't routine. It came from someone who had never shown interest before. Someone who had once praised Martin's generosity publicly, while benefiting from it quietly. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Then I replied with a single sentence. Transparency is welcome. I slept poorly. Not from fear. From awareness. This was the moment when quiet choices became visible ones. And visibility invites judgment. Eleanor sensed it before I said anything. You're bracing, she observed. I might be, I admitted. She smiled gently. You don't have to brace here. That had become our rhythm. The place where I didn't have to perform strength. Why do people get uncomfortable when kindness has structure? She asked suddenly. I blinked. What do you mean? They liked it when he was just doing it, she said. Not when there were rules. She was right, because structure reveals intent, and intent reveals limits. Martin's kindness had felt infinite, but it had never been unbound. The room was polished. Too polished. 3 people sat across from me. One smiled too quickly. Another didn't smile at all. The third observed. Why didn't Martin involve family? I answered calmly. He involved the people he believed needed consistency, not visibility. That answer unsettled them. Good. Control. Or access. Or reassurance that things would continue as before, quietly unquestioned. I offered none of that. Clarity. Documents. Records. Intent. Martin had left nothing vague. That was his protection. And now it was mine. They tried a softer approach. This must be overwhelming for you, one said kindly. It would be, I replied, if I hadn't chosen it. That ended the sympathy strategy. Not defensive. Not angry. Proud. Because I wasn't reacting. I was responding. Eleanor and I walked in the garden. Slowly. She held my arm lightly. You're steadier now, she said. I learned, I replied. She smiled. So did he. Martin had grown too. Just quietly. And now his quiet work was finally being understood. I knew it was coming. But knowing doesn't make deciding easier. The trust didn't require me forever. It required stewardship. And stewardship could evolve. Was I continuing this because it mattered? Or because stopping felt like abandonment? I sat with that question longer than any other. It mattered. But it didn't require self-erasure. I didn't go to the bank that day. I sent an email instead. And understood immediately. You're allowed to change the rhythm, she wrote back. Yes. I was. Not loss. Relief. The foundation was solid. It didn't need constant proving. I won't always come every Tuesday, I told her gently. She nodded. I won't forget you, she said simply. That wasn't a fear. It was a statement. Because presence isn't measured by frequency. It's measured by sincerity. Love doesn't require secrecy, but it does require intention. Martin had intention. I added openness. The review concluded quietly. No acquiescence. No upheaval. Just confirmation. The truth held. Gossip. Assumptions. People who only respected generosity when it benefited them. Meaning. Choice. A life that didn't orbit around obligation. I visited Eleanor without paperwork in mind. We talked about nothing important. And everything. I wasn't carrying Martin's secret anymore. I was carrying his values. There's a difference, because freezing happens when truth arrives without preparation. I was prepared, now. Not rigid. Not vague. Intentional. 38 years of Tuesdays had ended, but something better had replaced them. Understanding. One final decision. Not about money. About meaning. And when I made it, I knew the story would finally settle. The decision didn't arrive with drama. No tears. No speeches. No sudden clarity. Just a quiet certainty that felt earned. I revised the trust. Not to remove myself. Not to abandon Eleanor. But to ensure continuity beyond me. Oversight. Rotation. Accountability. A structure that would outlive emotion. That was the final gift. Martin believed showing up personally was the purest form of love. I believed ensuring longevity was the truest form of care. Both were right. Just in different seasons. I didn't mark it on the calendar. I didn't announce it. I simply went. Eleanor was by the window, humming softly. She looked up and smiled. You came on a different day last time, she said. I know, I replied. She nodded. That's okay. Release. I no longer needed to prove presence through repetition. I won't always come on Tuesdays, I reminded her. She patted my hand. He came because he wanted to, she said. You come because you choose to. That was everything. Not responsibility. Expectation. The kind that confuses love with obligation. Not to family. Not to the bank. To Martin. I didn't explain. I thanked him. For loving deeply. For trying his best. For trusting me eventually. Even if only in absence. I didn't say I forgave him. Because forgiveness implies wrongdoing. He hadn't been wrong. Just human. Life didn't suddenly bloom. It steadied. Which was better? Questions. Once the story lost drama, it lost interest. That was a relief. That I was lighter. Calmer. Present. And hugged me. Not formally. Genuinely. You did this beautifully, she said. We both did, I replied. Because love doesn't end with death. It evolves. Silence isn't strength. And noise isn't honesty. Clarity lives somewhere in between. It wasn't the discovery. It was realizing I had been underestimated. By myself. I traveled. Not far. But freely. I filled my days with things that didn't require explanation. Not the bank. Not the secrecy. The consistency. 38 years of choosing to show up. Not the schedule. The intention. When someone asks why my husband went to the bank every Tuesday for 38 years, I don't tell them the story. I tell them the lesson. That love, when intentional, leaves behind more than money. It leaves direction. I didn't inherit a secret. I inherited a responsibility, and I transformed it into a choice. Martin's Tuesdays ended. Mine began. Just not on a calendar. Integrity, continuity, and the quiet knowledge that showing up, when done honestly, never freezes you. It frees you. For more inspiring and heart-touching stories like this, please subscribe to our channel.